Hi, and welcome back to another video feature of the Immersive Worlds Handbook. Just behind me is a very famous building in postmodern architectural history. This is Michael Graves' building. The Portland building, some just call it the Portland. So I want to give you a video tour today focusing on the significance of this building, its controversies, and its true legacy here a few years after the death of the architect Michael Graves. So let me take you on a tour now. Okay, and in looking at the Portland building, for me it was significant to review Charles Jenks' Language of Postmodern Architecture. You can see the cover of the book focuses on Michael Graves' amazing building. So I wanted to use the opportunity to talk about the Portland building in the context of Jenks' book. I also happen to have stayed, as you could see there, just across the way. I was really near the building, so I had a chance to go down there a couple times, take some video, take some still shots, and I thought it'd be a nice opportunity. One of the funny things about Graves' building here is I think a lot of people, I don't know, maybe don't know how famous this building is and how significant it is in terms of the history of postmodern architecture. So it's another reason really I wanted to do this video, was to celebrate it a little bit for really being that first building that establishes the wave of postmodern architecture in the United States. So it's an opportunity to look at it in that context. You also, I think, get a chance to revel in its uniqueness. We'll think about some of these contexts in the video. For the remainder of the video, I really do want to focus on my on-site commentary. So there's some on-site video I shot with my microphone, and so let me allow you to jump into that commentary now and hear more about the famous building here, the Portland building, of course, in Portland, Oregon. Okay, so I just set up shop here outside the Starbucks and the Standard Plaza. So across the street here is the aforementioned building, Michael Graves. Opened up in 1982. Let me just adjust the exposure a little bit on my shot. Okay, so you're getting a good view here of the front of the building, and you also see Keski's Portlandia sculpture. If you watch the show Portlandia, you maybe know where we get the name of the show. As you look at the outside of the building, I think it should be noted that this particular building has certainly its detractors, and there's a lot of history relative to this building. So if you're interested, just Google the Portland building or the Portland Michael Graves, and you'll find, I think, quite a bit of information online, really good articles. In particular, look out for some of the articles that show you the original design of the building. We're getting a Max train in front of us here. Pretty quiet morning here on a Saturday. Chilly, just had a cup of coffee, and I said I have to come check out the building. A lot of controversy about the building when it opened in 1982. It was heralded by many as the first example in the United States of postmodern architecture. And 2 years after it opened, the individual who was on the jury that awarded the commission for the building to Michael Graves, Philip Johnson, 2 years later, you might know, he opened the very famous building, the AT&T building, which is now the Sony building, in New York City, and many people consider that to be also one of the great postmodern buildings in America. But Graves' building here is certainly considered the first. As I've shown you, it's the cover of Jenks' book on postmodern architecture. It has a lot of significance. Again, so many essays have been written about it. Now, one of the things I thought that was interesting about it was originally at the very top, and we can't obviously see up to the top, there was supposed to be basically temple structures up there. And I think the notion here was that Graves was trying to humanize the building itself. When the building was created after the competition, the mayor at the time of Portland had said he didn't want the building to be dehumanized. He was concerned that a lot of office buildings in the 80s looked rather generic. And if we pan around, actually, you see some other buildings here. Portland doesn't have a lot of high-rises, of course, but we can see a few. And I think you could see that certainly Graves' building stands out among them. And that was one of the points. One of the points was to say, can we try to do something that was different, and can we try not to follow the traditional approaches of so many other cities that design office buildings. That being said, there are many detractors. Some people at the time said it just was a disaster, it didn't work, it looked like a kid had designed it, and to this day there are people that talk about this and consider it to be a problem. Now, interestingly enough, Graves had designed this in an anthropomorphic sense, representing the human body, and I read an essay saying that he considered the windows, which, zoom in on a little bit, you see the windows here. One of the distinctive things about these windows is they're very small. And purportedly, people who work inside the building have said that it doesn't really allow for very good work conditions. And in this sense, you might want to check out my video by focusing on the Thompson Center in Chicago by Helmut Jahn, which is another one of these buildings I think that gets a lot of flack for its design, or I should say the disparity between the exterior design, the facade, if you will, though I think facade maybe has a negative connotation in this sense, and the interior uses of the space. Hold that thought as we get an ambulance coming by. So, you know, there's a disparity for some between the interior uses of the space and the exterior facade, and that, of course, is a concern. The other thing that's happening is as early as, or recent as 2014, there was discussion that there were plans to even demolish the building or certainly reconstruct it. So that's sort of in limbo right now, but what I've read is that some people have said that maybe there are plans to demolish the building, and you know, it certainly, I think, hurts the legacy of Graves and his work, but it's an interesting, you know, I think, recognition of the fact that the building for some remains, you know, controversial. And I think, you know, any good architecture is certainly going to do that. Now, the other thing you'll note about the building is the sense to, in addition to this anthropomorphism that Graves discusses, is this attempt to humanize it. It has a lot of these, you know, postmodern classical elements. We see, you know, essentially columns. In the original design, Graves wanted terracotta on the entirety of the outside structure to mimic some of the structures in Portland, the indigenous structures of the time. I think that was deemed to be, you know, a construction problem, so they used reinforced concrete on the exterior. And later, Graves said in an interview that he was fine with this fact. And you know, the point is, when you design something, it's not always going to be executed in a way that you originally intended, particularly when you think about the practicalities of the occupants in the building. And that is, I think, one interesting thing about some of these buildings, like the Thompson Center, is the fact that you have to think about the practicality of it and the use of it. And that's, you know, maybe one thing that is lost when the architect is designing the building or space in question. To go back to the point about the top, at the top of the building there are supposed to be temples that I guess we're going to cover some of the air conditioning systems. I have heard that the roof has green features, and you know, Portland certainly has one of the highest shares, I think, anywhere of LEED certified buildings. So you can read a little more on the roof of the building itself to get a sense of what that implies. Now, I think had those temples been maintained in the design at the top of the building, it would have brought something, you know, another element to it, and I think that could have been really interesting had that come to play. But certainly one other thing that changes it, right, is the Portlandia statue. And I mean, I don't know, the Portlandia statue I find interesting. It almost, for me, distracts from the building. I don't know if it quite fits in. If you go below the statue where the hand is there, it's a pretty dramatic effect as you look at it from below. But I will say that it definitely, just for me, doesn't necessarily fit in with the design of the building. But that's my opinion, as all of this is, of course. I'm trying to think some other elements to talk about. Well, you know, again, you continue, if you're interested, you know, look at Graves's work on this building online. One of the things that was pretty significant about it is the fact that it did garner some incredible recognition, AIA awards, 2011 National Historic Registry status. At the same time, if you search online, you're going to find numerous magazines, online journals, blogs that have this building as one of the ugliest in the world, actually. I saw it just last night on a top 10 list of ugliest buildings in the world. So, I don't know. That's kind of strange to me. It does have a real resonance. It reminds me in some ways a little bit of Jan's work in Chicago, particularly when I look at this blue, the choice of the blue here. And the Thompson Center, I think, has a much more stark or even harsh use of color, and I don't know if the color I like as much here, but here, the blue does, I think, distract a little bit from the, spaces around it here as we look in the courtyard and so forth. But incredibly significant, again, as a building. This is the one that we talk about when we discuss postmodern architecture in America. And I think, there are probably so many people that walk by the building and maybe don't recognize or realize its significance in this sense. So a lot to think about here today as we consider Michael Graves' amazing design of the Portland building. Okay, so we're back inside. I'm staying at the AC Hotel by Marriott. And, we're right here looking at Graves' iconic building, and I thought it would be worth a while maybe to reflect on a little bit more here from this other perspective. Again, in the video, I've taken you to the ground level and shown you some of the sites from that perspective just that way on 5th Street. So we're back here near 3rd Street, a few blocks away, getting a perspective. Now, the cool thing about this is I was getting ready for my trip to Portland this week in 2017, and I just grabbed a book kind of randomly, a book that I was interested in looking at because I'm writing a chapter for a new collection on urbanism, and indeed I'll be talking about postmodern architecture and some other issues of thematic architecture. And of all things, when I grabbed this book, which is Charles Jenks, The Language of Postmodern Architecture, I'm on the plane and I realized, like, oh, well, here we are. We're looking at Graves' book and or Graves' building, and of course the reason for this is Jenks says that this is the first postmodern building in the United States. So let's delve inside a little bit, and I thought maybe I'd read a passage to you. See if you find it as interesting as I do. This is from the introduction. Okay, I'm trying to focus in here. I don't have a tripod and I don't have a third hand to try to keep this left page stable, but we'll take a look here from the introduction. This is on page 7, and you could see at the top there in the left diagram, right? This is the original intention to have the temple structures on the top of the building. There's actually some construction going on below us, if you're wondering the noise. Kind of cool, you can see the demolition efforts as we speak. So it's probably making a little bit of noise here on the recording, but we'll press on. And it's a reminder, I think, of the transient nature of architecture in the city. I've mentioned to you in this video that perhaps this building will be no more a few years from now, and it might be radically altered. I hope not. I think its designation as a work of architectural significance should signify that it's worthy of staying. I know there's some issues with the windows and the sunlight not coming in, but maybe they can do something retrofitting the windows. So I thought we could read a little bit from here. So in this book, Jenks is talking about, of course, the significance of postmodern architecture, but at one point here he says that Graves' victory, so once he was awarded the commission to create the building, the victory was immediately contested by the local chapter of the American Institute of Architects, a challenge led, of course, by the modernists. They called his creation a dog of a building, a turkey, a jukebox, and oversized beribboned Christmas package. They asked that it be built in Las Vegas, not Portland. The protests ultimately led to another competition, which was again won by Graves in the spring of 1980, partially because his scheme was the cheapest. And if you remember, this building was built for $29 million, and again, that's in $1980, but it seems kind of a bargain to me. Going back to the text, people sometimes think that postmodern buildings are more expensive than late modern ones because of the ornament, polychromy, and sculpture. But often it's the reverse case because the very same elements can hide faults in construction. In the Portland, for instance, the flare of the giant painted keystone takes the eye off the squat proportions of the building, made necessary for economic reasons. But the main role of the art and ornament was different. Their presence returned architecture to the wider Western tradition of classicism, the freestyle tradition which stems ultimately from the Egyptians. Indeed, with the heavy blue-green piers and color contrast, the Portland even looks somewhat Egyptian. So we can take a look at it again and see if you concur with that. Definitely see elements there in the building that look Egyptian. Okay, so going back to the text a little bit more, Jenks goes on to say, if postmodernists refuse to accept either agnosticism or its visual equivalent, the bland, technocratic facade, then they will have to discover credible ideas in the building's program, or of the particular society for whom they are designing. Graves did this with his sculpture known as Portlandia, the woman who used to personify the civic hopes, virtues, and trade of the citizens in the 19th century. He transformed the classical maid into a dynamic athlete, flying over the front door of the public entrance, and soon she caught the imagination of the local inhabitants. Although the modernists demanded that she be banished, the citizens asked for her return, and she'll be sculpted by Raymond Caskey and put in place. Although critics tried to censor the ribbon ornament on the side of the building, these traditional signs of welcome were reinstated because of public protest. In short, the building had become the public art it used to be. Okay, so again, this book was written quite a few years ago, so things have changed since the time it was written. But, you know, again, it's an opportunity here to just look outside our window and think about the significance of Michael Graves' design. You're probably familiar with the fact that he has done a lot of work, or did a lot of work for Disney, designed so many incredible hotels for them, such as the Swan, the Disney Casting Center, and, you know, as all architects do, of course, he has a distinctive style and approach, and I think you definitely see this if you compare his building here with those that he did for Disney. I think you see the similarities in terms of the design, the color, the elements that he used, and so forth. So an opportunity today to look at a marvel of postmodern architecture, and as I said, the convenience of having Jenks's book right here to admire and to understand. And I do recommend, if you haven't read The Language of Postmodern Architecture, it's a quick read and it's a fun read, and it really does lay out a lot of the examples or elements or foundations of what postmodernism means in architecture. I hope you enjoyed the video feature today here in Portland, looking at Michael Graves' revolutionary building, here the Portland building, as well as the Portlandia statue. Please come back for additional video features of the Immersive Worlds Handbook.